Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be moving on to level 2 naming and writing formulas for ionic compounds. So these are going to include your transition metals. Your transition metals are located in the middle block on your periodic table. And because we don't know what their charge is based on their group number, we need to determine their charge by looking at the nonmetal that they are joined with. Now, there are a couple of transition metals that only have one charge. So for those transition metals, you do not need to include a Roman numeral. So let's go ahead and get started. For this first one, we have FeCl2. So we're going to write out our first element's name. So Fe stands for iron, and Cl stands for chlorine. Now, if we look at our flow chart, the first question we have for write the first element's name is, do you need a Roman numeral? So when I notice that iron is a transition metal located right here, number 26, I can see it doesn't have a charge. So yes, I do need to use a Roman numeral. So on my flow chart, I need to figure out what the charge of my metal is by looking at my nonmetal. Then I'm going to use one of these Roman numerals off to the left to indicate what my charge is. So when I see that I have one Fe and I have two Cls, I need to work backwards. So if I find chlorine on my periodic table, I can see that its charge is -1. So for every chlorine I have a -1 charge. I have 2 chlorines. So sometimes it's easy to write out your chemical formula by writing how many of your metals you have. That might help you understand that, okay, my non-metal has an overall charge of -2 because I have 2 chlorines. So if I have a -2 charge on my right side, that means my iron has to have an overall +2 charge. Okay, so that's one way that you can figure out the charge for iron. Another way you can figure out the charge is by working backwards. So we can see that my formula is FeCl2. So where did that 2 come from? That 2, it came from, if I go up here, it came from my iron. Because remember, part of writing our chemical formulas is to determine our charges and then to do our crisscross and reduce. So that's another way we can figure out that it's a +2. So now that I have my element names and I've figured out my charges, I can go ahead and I can write my chemical name. So it's going to be iron, and I'm going to include my Roman numeral of a 2, and then I'm going to change the ending of my nonmetal to chloride. All right, let's look at another example. This one's very similar to the one we just did, except now we have 3 chlorines. So I'm going to write Fe. I have 3 chlorines. And each of those chlorines I know has a -1 charge. Or I can write FeCl3, and I can do my reverse crisscross, and then see that my iron must be +3. Okay, so now I know my iron's +3. I'm going to write my first element name, my second element name, and it's going to be iron, Roman numeral 3, chloride. Okay? All right, let's try the next one. CuO. So I'm going to find Cu on my periodic table. It's right here. Again, I don't see a charge, so that tells me I need to figure out my charge. So I'm going to write copper as my first element. And then we all know that O is oxygen. So we need to work backwards. So I'm going to find my O for oxygen. And I see I have a -2 charge. Now I only have one O. So I'm going to write -2 on the top here. So that tells me my copper has to be +2. Now in this situation, a reverse crisscross is not going to work because we see we have one of those, we have one of those. So I can't just reverse crisscross here and go +1, -1 because that's not correct. So this does not work. It only works when you have a subscript written below your element symbol. So now I see I have copper +2. So I'm going to write my name as copper, Roman numeral 2, and then I'm going to change my ending to "-ide". So oxygen becomes "-ide". All right, let's do one where we're working backwards now. So we have the name, and we want to figure out our formula. So this is where we're going to be looking at our flow chart for the left-hand side for writing our chemical formulas. So the steps are, for ionic, look up your element symbols, find your charge. Okay, so first, let's find our element symbols for lead. Lead is right here, so it's going to be Pb. So Pb is my first element, and then we have oxide, which we know is oxygen. Then we're going to figure out our charges. Our Roman numeral tells us our charge. So if you look on the left-hand side, it says use your Roman numeral. On the opposite side, you have all of your Roman numerals written in numerical order. So looking at this symbol here, we know that that is going to be a +4. Then we're going to find oxygen. Oxygen is right here, and it has a -2. So now that we have our charges, the last step is to do our crisscross, just like we did for our level 1 problems. So I'm going to write it off to the side, Pb plus 4O minus 2. I'm going to crisscross my 4 underneath my O, my 2 underneath my Pb. Now before I write that formula, I'm noticing that I can still reduce. So if it's not in its most simplified version, you need to make sure you reduce it. So I know 2 goes into 4 2 times. So I'm going to reduce it down to PbO2. I just divided both of these numbers by 2. And that's how I got that formula.